to talk about, what we're going to talk about is the U.S. Foreign Service. You're going to hear over and over and over what I have in the bottom left-hand corner, careers.state.gov. So, I wouldn't worry too much about notes because about 80-85% of what comes out of my mouth, you can find at careers.state.gov. You'll also hear me say usajobs.gov because this is the federal government's website for applying for jobs. So the U.S. Department of State participates as other agencies do. Now, I always tell people, go straight to careers.state.gov first because it's actually an excellent site, and it will lead you directly to where you want to go on usajobs.gov instead of having to do a search when you get there. Again, Alan DuBose, I'm a diplomat in residence. You can contact me at dirsouth@state.gov if you want to talk to me in more details. If you do, I'll set an appointment. I'm also going to say, did you go to careers.state.gov and do your due diligence? And the reason is because you will understand the context of my answers. It'll make more sense to you when I answer your questions if you have done some research in the first place. Today, we're going to talk about the role of the U.S. Department of State and U.S. Foreign Service, U.S. Foreign Service careers, student programs, and any questions we have. I have on the left this ad that I asked them to pull out from the archives when I started doing this job. And that is from Colin Powell back in 2004, where you don't have to read all that, but he was saying, we're looking for people from careers, including administrative. And I thought, I'm an administrator. I've been working 17 years in private industry. I know business backwards and forwards. I never thought the Foreign Service wanted somebody like me. And the reality is we need people who can do a lot of different things, but many times those people don't even know that we need them. So hopefully a little light's going to go off and some of you may have an epiphany that you may fit in much more than you realize. So let's start with talking about the U.S. Foreign Service. Our mission is to lead America's foreign policy through diplomacy. And the reason I made that bold is there are other foreign service agencies, intelligence agencies, DOD, where they have responsibilities overseas. They have foreign service personnel. Foreign affairs agencies do that. However, we are the one who actually speaks for the White House or for whatever U.S. policy is abroad. We are America's diplomatic corps. The Department of State has led U.S. foreign policy since 1789 abroad. We're actually the oldest agency in our federal government, and the Foreign Service itself is fairly young, being started in 1924 when they, through the Foreign Service Act, kind of started cobbling together some of the work that was being done at the Department of State and carved out the Foreign Service. So the best way to understand this is you have the Department of State, and then within the Department of State is a part of it that is the U.S. Foreign Service. So we're on our own promotion plans, our own pay plans, but we are Department of State employees. It's just that our roles and responsibilities might be different from others who are also part of the Department of State, and our requirements that we do serve portions of our career abroad. Although the reality is we usually have to tell people to come back to the States because they enjoy being abroad so much. We're headquartered in DC, and we have special purpose offices spread throughout the US. We have 276 posts abroad spread across 191 countries. You do the math, see they don't match. The reason is because we have consulates or consulate generals. And all this means is that when we go into a country and we want to have a diplomatic presence, normally what we first set up is an embassy. So that picture you saw preceding this one was Brazil. In Brazil, you would have Embassy Brasilia, which is the capital. However, Embassy Brasilia would also represent Mission Brazil, which is the country. In Brazil, we have consulates in Porto Alegre, Recife, Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, and some other places. So what we would say is that those are Consulate General Rio de Janeiro, our Consulate General Porto Alegre. They report into Embassy Brasilia, but they're all part of Mission Brazil. So the difference between these two numbers you see are those consulates. And the reason that Uncle Sam has consulates in other countries is overwhelming majority, it's one of two reasons. Financial interests, kind of like DC and New York, where you have a government capital and then a center for financial interest that's different, or there happen to be a lot of American citizens living in that country and they want to take care of it. There are approximately 77,000 employees, including about 14,000 who are foreign service, not as many as one may think, 10,000 who are civil service. These are our people normally back in DC who are supporting the foreign service from DC, and then our 50,000 locally employed staff. We're not going to talk about them today, but they're actually crucially important. These are the people who are in the country, like Brazil, and they may or may not be US citizens. The majority are normally not US citizens, and they are employed by the embassy, their consulate in that country. The reason I say they're crucially important is because it costs Uncle Sam between $700,000 to $750,000 to send one of us overseas for a normal 3-year tour. So when we go abroad, we're normally going to be in supervisory positions. We're not going to be doing the hands-on work. And it's crucial that we have the locally employed staff who really know what they're doing as far as that's concerned. And also we depend on them to introduce us to the local people who are in the government or in the private world, and they are our archival knowledge. So our focus is going to be on the foreign service personnel for the rest of this presentation. So first, let's understand what are the career options for foreign service officers and foreign service specialists. So talking foreign service, there are basically two broad options. One is specialists, the other is officers, but I'm going to stop calling officers and call them generalists so there won't be any confusion. Foreign service specialists are subject matter experts in whatever their specialty is. And they're going to serve usually their entire career in whatever that specialty is. So let's say human resources, facility management, finance, those are specialties. They're going to be expected to have an undergraduate or maybe a graduate degree, or maybe 3 to 5 years of work experience, or maybe a combination of those in whatever that specialty is, as opposed to generalists, where you can major in whatever you feel like majoring in. I met a biology major before, psychology majors. I've met everything. I talked to 2 people who majored in music a few weeks ago. So it doesn't really matter what your major is. We only have 5 career tracks. We'll teach you what we need you to know. So let's talk about the specialist career tracks first. Specialist career tracks, like I said, include administration, and that's where you're going to find your finance, human resources, something we call general services officer, which is more like a catch-all logistics officer. They have to move cars, get people, managing contracts, sometimes housing. They do general type administrative work. Construction engineering, we need people to build our embassies. We need engineers, structural engineers, architects, people who are actually going to be project managers building our embassies. Facility managers, these are the people who, once the embassy is built, they need to take care of it. They have to take care of parking garages, sometimes streets in front of our property. So full-time facility managers. IT, we have a massive problem finding IT personnel for a couple of reasons. First is because no IT people think about us, even though our IT requirements are higher than they are in the private world, because we're not expecting them to necessarily be online coding, but they have to understand the work. They have to manage the staff. They have top secret communication they may have to get involved in, which is different. You don't necessarily find in the private world. And here's another thing. They have to be able to speak ambassadorese, which means they have to take technical information and make it idiot-proof so an ambassador can understand what they're talking about. So it's very important that our IT people understand the technical side and can also speak regular English. Speaking of English, we do have a small cadre of international information English language programs. We also have health services, medical staff, doctors, psychiatrists, nurse practitioners who are posted abroad. Many times it's kind of like an inverse relationship. If you're in a country that has well-developed medical care, maybe in France, the assumption is, you'll get your medical care in the local economy. So we're probably gonna have a small office there, but I've never been to Amman, Jordan, but I understand in Amman, it's more like an HMO because they don't necessarily have the good medical care there. So our office there provides a wide range of services, more similar to what you find at an HMO back in the States. Office management is pretty much our clerical. And the last group I'll mention is law enforcement and security, which nobody refers to it by that name. In the movies, they call it diplomatic security or DS. And these are the ones who are our special agents and also our SEOs, which is security engineering officer, which means they understand the cybersecurity and the technical side. And so our DS group is responsible for background checks. They're also responsible for physical security and any computerized or communication security when we're at post abroad. So we talked about the specialists and those people who are going to need specialized skills. Now let's talk about the generalists. The generalists, again, it doesn't matter what your major is. These are your choices for careers. Consular. Nobody can major in consular. To the best of my knowledge, I've never seen a college that had a consular major because it's unique to us. Consular is basically two responsibilities. One is going to be issuing visas to people who want to enter the US. So if someone who's not a US citizen in another country wants to come visit the US or come be a student in the US, they may have to get a visa. And it would be a consular officer who interview them, go through their documentation, make the decision yes or no, whether or not they're going to give them a visa to come study in the US and visit the US, and then go back home the way they made their commitment to do. The other major responsibility for consular officers has to do with American citizens, taking care of American citizens abroad. So if something bad happens, let's say I'm in France and I lose my passport and I need an emergency passport, the one who's going to help me out, it's probably going to be a consular officer. And if something good happens, let's say you're in Paris and that baby was born sooner than we expected and I need a passport or a birth certificate for my baby who from Alabama, well, you can't get birth certificate for Alabama if the baby was born in Paris, but there is documentation you can get, and that's what the consular officers would provide. So I'm going to skip over them and go to management, which is what I am. And this little image kind of reflects management because it is a whole lot of supervising. Most of those specialist positions we saw in the preceding slide actually report through management. So the management officer usually is the largest staff at a post. When I was in Dubai, I think there were 87 people reporting to me, including motor pool and those other areas that you saw, VIP visitors. So we had staff that did everything. You can imagine pretty much what you find in the private world, and that's what a management officer is responsible for. Public diplomacy, I call the face of the State Department. And the reason I say that is because when you look on TV and see somebody from the Foreign Service talking, that face is probably a PD officer. They are the people who are responsible for our social media. They manage our website. So if you read an embassy's website, you read what's going on there, how it's structured, that's normally our PD staff who put that together. They interface with journalists, which means sometimes they have to explain questions to journalists about US policy. So they're not just talking heads. They have to actually understand as well and communicate that because people listen when they talk in another country. So that's our PD staff. And I save economic and political for last, even though they don't like it, because I group them together as reporting officers. And that's because many times they report information. Economic officers report economic information, political officers report political information. Why do they report all the time? And the answer is Uncle Sam does not like surprises. So economic and political officers have to gather intelligence. Now, we're not an intelligence agency, but we gather intelligence. The majority of the time, the intelligence we gather is what's called public source, meaning that we can find it anywhere. It's public, I'll put it that way. So if you know where to go, you can go find this information somewhere it's open to the public. And they gather most of their information from there. The other is where they really earn their paycheck, and that is human intelligence. This is getting to know the movers and shakers in the local economy in that country, understanding the culture, understanding how to find people who are going to provide information that may not be public information, but it's communicated to them verbally. It would be understanding who to contact in that government and making relationships with those people in that government. so you can get information, write it up, and then share it with DC. And back in DC, they'll have political or economic officers who are receiving this information from a lot of different political and econ officers out in the field, and they're looking for patterns. They're trying to see commonalities so they can predict a problem or an issue or an opportunity before it happens. If something does happen, then normally what happens is they cobble everybody together, make some decisions, and then the final decision does not happen at post. It happens in DC. And in DC, they give the notification, okay, at the embassy, here's the final decision. This is the message. You, political or economic officer, you go deliver the message for the US policy on whatever issue this is. So political and econ officers send information, they cobble, collect, and send information to DC. They advise, and then when decisions have to be made and sent and communicated locally, they're the ones responsible for that. So when you think of the classic diplomat, this is really what they're talking about. So I just told you can major in anything and still be a Foreign Service generalist. So how do we differentiate who we want to bring in and who we decline offers? And the answer is we use these 13 dimensions. So again, you can major in drama if you're good at these 13 dimensions. You're not going to hear that any are more important than others, but experience has taught me that there are 3 that stand out. One is initiative and leadership, and that's because, again, we're expected to be supervisors and leaders at literally any moment. So even if we are on an assignment that may not have anybody reporting to us, if let's say that supervisor, I don't know, has kidney failure and has to leave post suddenly in the middle of the night, they're not going to send a substitute from DC. They're going to look around at post and say, who do we have who can manage that section? Oh, Alan, you don't have anybody reporting to you right now. So for the next 6 weeks, we expect you to manage that section in consular, even though you're management officer. Yeah, so leadership and the ability to supervise is very important to us. And that's why we want our officers to be good at those 13 dimensions instead of focusing too much on one skill. Another is cultural adaptability. Cultural adaptability in the simplest form means taking somebody from one environment they're used to and putting them in a different environment. So that's the simple environment, like you go from high school to college. That's different. Do you struggle, or do you say, hey, okay, this is different, let me figure it out, and then you adapt? That's cultural adaptability. Our cultural adaptability, you see it coming. It's where we pick you up from one country and put you in another country where you may not have even spoke that language 6 months prior, but you took training at our school, Foreign Service Institute, and we taught you what you needed to know. And now here you are in that country having to make decisions and having people work for you, and you have to figure stuff out. And the last thing, and the overriding thing, is judgment. So even if we assume that everything is perfect, and trust me, it is never perfect, it is never completely clear, but for our purposes, let's assume everything is given to you and it's in line, you still have to make the decision. And no matter what decision you make, there are competing interests. So you have to use the judgment to make sure that whatever decision you're making is the best decision given your situation at hand. And that judgment pretty much is the most important thing. And this is one thing I think people will agree on, that judgment kind of trumps everything else. All right, we're going to talk now how to become a Foreign Service diplomat. This looks daunting. It's not as bad as it looks. And again, you can find this. I kind of cut and pasted this from our website, CareersStategov. So you can find it there. Might look a little different, but it's the same concept. The Foreign Service Officer test is the first stage. This is a test that's taken at Pearson VUE, which is a private testing center. But again, go to careers.state.gov and all the links will be there to take you directly to Pearson VUE, where someone can register and find out more information. As far as study materials are concerned, this is the only thing you can really study for in the process. And our study materials or guidance are actually on our site. And we don't suggest people go too far outside of that, because you may find someone on the internet sharing wrong information or antiquated information or trying to sell something. It's actually public information. So if you go to careers.state.gov, it'll have what you need to prepare for the service, or it'll tell you where you can find it and like reading lists. And what you're going to want to know is you want to know geography, US history, world history. You want to know about events going on current and probably the last 100 years or so, treaties. Just have a general understanding of these, be familiar with them. And also I'd encourage people to get in the international mindset. What does that mean? Start reading the Wall Street Journal, start reading The Economist. If you speak any Spanish, start listening to Univision News. So start listening to news in a different language, or BBC, it's English, but it's from outside the US. So you're hearing a different perspective than just the US perspective. Start getting in that international mindset, the world view, instead of just one view. And it'll help you kind of start to prepare for the FSOT along with the subjects. If people pass the FSOT, their results go to the QEP, which is Qualifications Evaluation Panel. This is a group of individuals, and they will take through and read through and make final decisions. Who do we want to actually invite to our interview? But of course, we're the government. We don't call them interview. We call them oral assessment. And the oral assessment is where they take 8 people at one time who are all at the same stage in the process and bring them in for a day. And during that day, 5 to 6 hours, they're going to go through some individual analysis. They're going to go through a group effort where they're going to have to do a project together and be observed on that. And they're going to have also the standard interview classic where they ask you questions and you answer those questions. The good thing is at the end of the day, you're going to be told if you passed or not. And if you did pass, they're going to give you your score. So after they give you your score and you calm down a little bit, they're going to take your score and set that aside and say, okay, now you have to get your medical and security clearances. That's on you. And what that simply means is they'll tell you how to do it. And you have to submit all this information, that filling out questionnaires so diplomatic security and medical services can get your clearances. This is the part of the process that tends to slow everybody down, is that security clearance, because everybody has to get a top secret security clearance. We tell everybody to plan for about a year. Mine took 8 months, but we tell everybody plan for about a year. And I have heard of some that go more than a year because of unique circumstances. But the bottom line is you have to get it. So you just do whatever they tell you to do. Usually it's a back and forth. It's not like you give them a data dump and you don't hear anything again. Usually you give them a data dump and then you might get a question or two, and then you might not hear anything for a few months, and then they may come back. So that's actually a good thing when they come back, because it means it's progressing. After the clearances are in hand, the totality of everything collected at that point goes to the suitability review panel. Think of them like an admissions panel at a college, and they make a binary decision whether or not they want to make you a conditional offer. Assuming they say yes, you don't just suddenly show up for work. What happens is they put you on our register, which is nothing more than a list by whatever your career track is: management, PD, consular, top scorer. They pull the score from the oral assessment, not the totality of scores, just the score from the oral assessment, and they rank people by their career track based on that score. So when time comes, usually 3 times a year, for us to have an orientation class, they will say, we need 13 PD people, we need 17 management, 20 political, and they go down each of those registered lists, and that's how they invite people in to start the orientation class. Once that fanny hits the seat in the orientation class, it doesn't matter if you're 24 or 44, you have 4 years of experience, or 20 years of experience, and you just finished in the military. You are now an entry-level officer in the U.S. Foreign Service, and our attitude going forward is that we will teach you everything you need to know to have a successful career and retire with the U.S. Foreign Service if you choose to. I'm going to go through this one quicker because a lot of this is redundant. The specialist process is a little different at the beginning. With specialists, they don't go through Pearson VUE. What will happen is there will be a notification on usajobs.gov and on careers.state.gov that says there's a vacancy announcement for facility manager, vacancy announcement for IT. And that's an opening and closing when people can apply. So the applicant would go through usajobs.gov. I always tell them, go to CareersStategov, click on that, it'll take you to usajobs.gov to the exactly where you want to go. And then in very government-esque communication, that vacancy announcement is pages and pages and pages of details about everything that is required, about timing, about points of contact. So in reality, the information's there. You don't need to ask anybody any questions. And if there's any nuance, they have a point of contact who you would contact. You submit your application that way. From that point forward, it goes to a QEP. The QEP does the same thing about making a decision who to invite to the orals. The only difference is during the oral exam, they also have to pass a competency portion. So this is something generalists don't have to do because they don't have to prove they know anything about consular work. Oral assessment, our finance people have to prove that they actually have some finance skills in HR, facilities. So that's the biggest difference, is how it starts and that competency exam. After that, it's the same process for our specialists. All right, now I'm going to talk student programs, then we'll take Q&A. So first program I wanted to talk about is our Foreign Affairs IT Fellowship Program. And I mentioned this, I put this first for a few reasons. One is because it is currently open, where some of the others closed a long time ago. And the other is because we need IT people. But basically, this is a fellowship program, and all these programs, or almost all of these you're going to hear me talk about, require U.S. citizenship. We don't care if you were born in the U.S. or naturalized, but they require a top secret clearance and U.S. citizenship. Our IT, this FATE fellowship, is 2-year fellowship that can be used for your junior, senior year for you to get your bachelor's degree in an IT-related field, or if you're graduating senior or have already graduated and you're out in the work world, you can go get a 2-year master's degree in an IT-related field. So either way, you can use this fellowship. The academic funding is $37,000 annually for tuition, room, board, and a stipend, and that's normally enough to cover costs at the schools. They have 2 internships as part of this program. One of them is at the State Department in DC, and the other is going to be at an embassy or consulate abroad. And then after that, kind of like ROTC, there's a 5-year commitment as an information management specialist. So you have your 2 years of study, 5 years with the State Department. So you're pretty much taken care of career-wise for at least 7 years. But most people tend to stay in after that. The deadline for this is January 31 of 2022. You can find out more information by contacting fatefellowship.org, or you can contact me. Now, similar programs, actually some programs that FATE was modeled after. So these are older programs, but these have all closed for the year. These won't open again until August of 22 for summer of 2023. The Charles Rangel and Thomas Pickering Fellowship programs. One of the differences in this program from FATE is while it's a 2-year degree, it's only for masters. So the eligible would be seniors in college or people who've already graduated. I was talking to somebody yesterday who's a candidate. He graduated in 2019, and now he's trying to go get this fellowship. He's being interviewed. The award is $42,000. And the reason you see a difference in the numbers is because these are more usually officer positions as opposed to IT, and the master's degrees tend to be more expensive for those programs. They also have a stipend, $18,000, 2 internships. Here's the only significant difference between Rangel and Pickering is that the Rangel internship is first one on Capitol Hill and the other one abroad. And with the Pickering, the first one is at State Department, Maine State, and the other one abroad. Again, must be US citizens and 5-year commitment. And that leads us to one program that is also open. This program is actually a fairly small program, but the deadline is February 15th of 2022. This is more for the undergrad students. So this is for students who are at least sophomore status at the time of application, which would be before February 15th. And these students go to a 6-week summer session where they actually live on the campus of Howard University, assuming that we're not still in our COVID status. They would take 2 courses in a seminar where they learn U.S. foreign policy, economics, writing. They are introduced to other government agencies. They get to take these cool field trips and go to the other agencies and see how they do things there and how they fit in our international policy puzzle. And here's the best part. Tuition is paid for, travel is paid for back and forth, housing is there on campus. You get 2 meals a day and they pay you $3,300 to do all this. You can't beat this. And also those 2 courses you're taking are Howard University courses. So if you take these to your registrar at University of Alabama, you might get 6 hours of credit from it. So the deadline is the 15th of 2022. Any questions, again, you can contact them directly or me. Other student programs. Our classic internship program, which is offered usually not quarterly, probably 3 times a year, is this is unpaid internship where students can serve abroad or they can in DC normally. It can be wherever there's a need. So like at the UN, there might be a need for an intern, but generally speaking, the majority of these domestic are based in DC. They do require 60 credit hours when the internship starts, not at the time of application. So mostly juniors, seniors, or grad students. You have to be returning back to school after the internship's over. That's how you figure out whether or not you're still an intern or not. The deadline has passed for summer 2022, which means the next deadline will be for the fall of 2022 interns. And since it's unpaid, you got to pay your own dime if you're going overseas, which is why I always tell students, if you're going to compete for these, you get more than one choice. Usually you get 2 or 3 choices when you apply. I always put a domestic one because A, they're cheaper, and B, where are you going to learn more? At an office, away, or at headquarters? If you're in an embassy, that's a cool, fun thing to do. But if you're at headquarters in DC, you're really getting a bigger picture. The next one is USFSIP. And this program, I'll explain this one. This is for current sophomores or juniors with demonstrated financial need. But since this closed August 29th, that deadline's already passed. So that would mean to qualify next August would be current freshman or sophomore. So someone who's a current freshman or sophomore, come August, would be able to apply for this, and they would have to have demonstrated financial need. This is a program that really is developing people to become foreign service officers. They still have to take the test, but it's pretty much preparing them for it because they have 2 internships built in. That's why they require those specific years. And the interns, besides the internships, they're going through a rotation where they're going to be not only learning about the professional development, the writing skills, they also work on the policy desk or in the functional bureaus. And they get to go to an assignment at an embassy overseas for their second internship. So this is as good a program as any, but again, demonstrating financial need is the catch on that one. All right, pathways. Pathways are federal government programs. These are paid internships. These are oriented more towards people who are interested in civil service careers. Again, it doesn't preclude someone from taking this and then competing for the foreign service, but really the intent is to have the students working in civil service internships. They have the paid pathways for undergrad, and then they have the paid pathways for recent graduates. And the recent graduates is a little different, that it's really a 1-year career development program. And if somebody completes that 1 year successfully, then they're able to convert to non-competitive service. This competitive service should be non-competitive service. But basically what that means is instead of them having to compete for a job against everybody in the world, they are only competing against other people who are like that. So it makes it a lot easier to get a full-time career as a civil servant. Last page, Virtual Student Federal Service Intern, VSFS. This is a cool program. This is a program that was built to be virtual, so that was not affected by the pandemic. The way it works is The, the intern pretty much works individually or in a small group with their supervisor, and the supervisor gives them their assignments, and the student commits 10 hours a week to this unpaid work. They do require US citizenship, but not any clearance. So this is when they don't need to worry about getting clearances. And I'll give you a real life example. I would meet with my intern every Monday at 10 a.m. I would give her an assignment. The next Monday, she would return it to me. Or if it was an assignment that was something that would take longer, she'd give me an update and we would have a back and forth. So this builds in kind of a mentor protege relationship naturally. And usually one supervisor doesn't have that many interns, from 1 to maybe 5. That's about it. So you're getting to know other interns as well as just your supervisor. And that gives you the ability to really learn if this is a career for you. The only catch is not a big one. It's that they announce it on July 1, close it on July 31st when you're not thinking about this sort of stuff. So all you do is you go to careers.state.gov and put a notification in. So it'll shoot you an email to remind you to apply for this. And then August would be the interview period. And then when the academic year starts, that's when you'd actually be performing the internship. Last bullet I have here is deceptive because it's just one little bullet. But if you click on state.gov/students, it's going to lead you to our site for our Bureau of Education and Cultural Affairs. This is our bureau that sponsors a lot of exchange programs and initiatives like Fulbright. So if you go to this site and click on that, it will show a lot more that we sponsor that you may be interested in that can help prepare you, not necessarily doing the work in our offices, but with languages or travel that can help develop those skills when you want to compete in the foreign service. With that said, remember careers.state.gov. You probably heard enough out of my mouth today. usajobs.gov is the federal service site for applying. State.gov/students is where you can find our sponsored programs. And you can always send me an email at dirsouth@state.gov if you'd like an individual appointment. But if you do, I'm going to say, did you go to careers.state.gov and do your research? Because it'll help you really understand the nuances of my answers. So with that said, I am now open to any questions. It's a small group. So just unmute yourself and start talking. We can probably handle it that way.
So for the foreign service officer process that we discussed, when do you recommend starting that process? Because I know you said for top security clearance, it takes up to a year. So do you recommend doing that when we are still students or after?
Okay, this is a double-edged sword. My answer is going to be when you think that you're strong enough in those 13 dimensions that you're going to be able to compete. If you are not chosen at any point in the process, you lose a year. You can't apply again for a year. So I'm not going to give you a straight answer, but what I will say is that students will be competing against people who may have 10, 15 years of experience. So you're not meeting the minimum requirements. You're going to have to compete against people who have experience. When you get through the FSOT portion, which is the written part, then a lot of it comes down to the ability to answer questions based on real life experience. You won't be asked hypotheticals in the orals. They won't say, what would you do if this happened? What they will say is, tell us about a time this happened and how you handled it. So if you're an undergrad student, you go through those 13 dimensions. If you think that you have a good answer for each of those 13 dimensions that you can pull from your life experience or your work experience or your volunteer experience, then to answer your question, I would say take the test whenever you feel comfortable. If you think you don't really have good answers for all those yet, I would just go on with life and start developing some skills for a few years until you feel like you can answer those. One thing I have seen is that trying to time it doesn't work well. It's not unusual for our people not to pass it the first time. I did not pass it the first time. I went and talked to the DIR. I was living in Boca Raton. I didn't pass it, got my failing cert. I went and talked to the EIR at Florida International, and he said, here's your problem. You've been writing like a businessman for the last 15 years. Bullets, bang, 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 bang. We want nice writing. We want like a term paper, like a thesis. I said, oh, I understand. After that, it was like a hot knife through butter for me. But that was because I had 17 years of experience. So I have some colleagues who had no problem with their writing, but they struggled in their orals. So it all really depends on where your strengths and your weaknesses are. That was a long answer, but hopefully you kind of get my point. But trying to time it like, okay, if I take it here and I'll graduate at this point, it just doesn't seem to work that way. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to tell you what I talked about when people don't have any questions, which is fine. When I say this, you'll probably say, oh yeah, I haven't thought about that. Security clearances. Okay, so security clearances. Again, we require security clearances. If you have a security clearance already, like military security, that can't hurt, but still diplomatic security has to do their own due diligence. So it may speed up the process, it may not, it all depends. All you can control is you submit your information and do what they tell you to do. And the one thing they tell you to do is tell the truth. So no matter what, you tell the truth. They will find out. They will talk to your high school teacher. They will talk to the neighbor in your apartment building. They will go talk to your landlord. They will talk to your cousin. They will go to your Instagram page. They will do whatever to get a profile of you that they feel comfortable with, because ultimately the purpose of a security clearance is simply to see if you are at risk, if we send you overseas to take sensitive information and divulge it to someone else. So sometimes the sin is not what kills the applicant, it's lying about it. So that's why I say tell the truth. The two most common problems students have is marijuana, not drugs. Drugs will kill you. Marijuana won't. Marijuana kind of been sorted. So students lying about marijuana, or I'd say continuing to use marijuana when they should know better. And the other is financial, not handling their finances correctly. And so I would encourage students who are serious about any career with the US government, military, or foreign service, USAID, any of these, don't use marijuana, just stop. Just stop, because they will find out. The other is financial. Okay, this is a little more complicated, but I can sum it up real quickly. Don't get nickel and dime. Let's say you have 3 roommates, your portion of the rent is $200. You're short $25, so you go to the landlord and say, I only have $175 this month. Your landlord says, okay, not a big deal. Just give me the $175. You do that. As far as you're concerned, there's no problem, right? Our agent goes and talks to that landlord and says, does Cole pay his rent every month on time, in full? Landlord's going to say, hey, he's not a bad kid. Hey, he's short every once in a while. You pay me $175 1 month. You just shot yourself in the foot. Co-signing. So if your parents co-sign on something for you and they find out their parents ended up paying for it as opposed to you paying for it, shooting yourself in the foot. So financials get students in trouble a lot because they don't look at it as a big deal. Ironically, student loans is not a big deal. Why? Student loans, here's the answer. When you're asked, oh, you have $30,000 in student loans. How do you plan on paying that back? Your answer is, I plan on paying it back based on the agreement that I signed when I took these student loans out. It is that simple. When you start getting the bills or you have to get the coupons and pay for those student loans, you do it based on what you're supposed to do. They're not looking for you to pay off all your $30,000 in student loans just to become eligible to get a clearance. All they're trying to see is if you're going to do what you've committed to do. That's why I say student loans are the easiest thing as far as clearances are concerned. It's the other nickel and dime stuff that kills people because they don't take it seriously, because they forget that it's not the amount of the money, it's the character behind it. What character do you have, or are you easily manipulated or influenced? That's really what they're looking for. Okay. Any questions about clearances? Okay, another question I get, and then that's pretty much the other one I'll drop out there unless people have other questions, is the assignment abroad process. What happens is during your first assignment, they bring people into what's called A100 class, and in that A100 class, they call it A100 because their target's like 100 students. It might be a little more, a little less. So let's say there are 90 kids in your, 90 people, not kids, 90 people in your class. You're going to get a list on the very first day of the 90 assignments. There might be 10 in Mexico, 15 in Germany, who knows? They might be spread around the world. But the bottom line is the number of opportunities of the actual jobs for 2 years are going to be equal to the number of people in class, which means somebody's getting each one of those. And what we do is we have a group of people kind of like your RA when you go to college, and these are the people who are helping you during class, and they're gonna pull you aside, have a nice conversation, find out if you have a family or not, if you wanna, you got some Spanish, do you wanna get more Spanish, or did you already pass the test and you wanna get some Portuguese? How do you wanna do this? You wanna get to post quickly, or you wanna stick around and do some more studying? And then ultimately, on the last day of that A100, 30 days later, they call it flag day. They call you up and give you a flag to where you're going. So you find out which post you're going to. So you get whatever training you need, and then you're off to that post for 2 years. They hold your hand for that one, but still, you know, you've had your input, but they make the final decision. The next assignment is also a 2-year assignment, but now it's all automated. When your time comes, we call it bidding. When bid cycle opens, you just go online and it'll have this long list of positions. And now you compete for each of those positions, but you're competing against people who are all second tour. Because remember, we have more than one class a year. And some people get a little behind because they're in training. So the bottom line is you're competing, but you're only competing people kind of at your level. After that, you reach mid-level. And at mid-level, think of it like the bell curve. This is where you have 80% of the assignments, which means now you're competing against a big pool of people, but there are a lot more opportunities as well. So that means you get to start deciding based on whatever your interests are, where you want to take your career. If you say, I want to be someone who spends most of my career in Latin America, then you just keep bidding on jobs in Latin America. If you say, I want to bid on opportunities that are spread across the world or in Arabic speaking countries, that's a niche. Mandarin and Arabic. If you get Mandarin or Arabic, Uncle Sam will spend enough money necessarily, if you qualify, for 2 years of training. So 1 year in DC, 1 year abroad, then you do your 3-year tour. So they can spend 5 years on you, getting you ready to go to an Arabic speaking country if you start from scratch. So do you think they're going to want you to leave there for your next tour? No, they might not make you stay there, but they're definitely going to be tapping you on the shoulder after that saying, we just spent 5 years on you. We'd really like you to bid another tour over there somewhere in an Arabic speaking country so we can get some more out of the Arabic we taught you. And the same thing for Mandarin. I'd say at least 2/3 of the people I know who got Mandarin ended up doing more than one tour in China. So these are the sorts of things that now you have control over, and a lot of decisions you make are going to be based on your personal interests, how fast you want to go in your career, family issues, or if you just like areas. Hey, I love this part of the world and I want to be there. And oh, by the way, probably anywhere from 2/3 to 3/4 of the time, you're probably going to be overseas. Then you come back to the States. They don't want people staying overseas forever. And they used to have that problem in the old days because then people kind of forgot that they were representing the US. So now they make you, well, they have it. Yeah, they make you come back. They pretty much put enough pressure on you after you've been overseas, usually by 3 tours. If you spend 3 tours consecutively overseas, you're going to get some heat to come back to the States for at least 1 year, 1 tour. So that's kind of the assignment process. But all that to say, after your first 2 assignments, a lot of it's on you and how you want to do it. And you learn little tricks. Like if you have an elderly parent and you got to go overseas, you know, you got Canada and Mexico on the borders. So you can be in Toronto and your elderly parents in Michigan. So there are little tricks you learn about how to do it. All right, anything else? That's it for me.
Thank you again for doing this. And I'll just put in the link for our online calendar for International Education Week here in the chat box. And this session was actually recorded, so we'll be uploading it to our YouTube channel. Okay. Thank you again, Mr. DuBose.
All right, I enjoyed talking to everybody.
Bye.